I'd like to just welcome you. My name is Dr. Leandra Zarno. I am a member of the History Department and a Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies affiliate. And I'm pleased to welcome you to University of Houston for those of you at home. We are gathered here this evening to speak with writer and curator Samina Ali about her advocacy of Muslim women in the United States and abroad and her challenge of Islamophobia. And we're proud here in Houston to be the U.S.'s most diverse city, and we want to draw attention positively to this feature of our metropolis this evening by spotlighting Muslim Americans on campus in our midst. And before I introduce Ali, I want to draw attention to our collaborative sponsors. First, the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies program at UH is proud to announce our new major that launched this fall, as well as our minor in LGBT studies, which is the first of its kind in Texas. And we invited Ali to campus in conjunction with the course all majors take, Issues in Feminist Research, which focuses on how we document and represent gender from various disciplinary angles. So we were very delighted to have her in class this afternoon and again this evening. One focus of this class is directed on student research in the Carrie C. Stewart Women's Archive and Research Collection that houses currently over 75 separate women's history collections. And we're growing and we're growing. And these are personal papers and organizational papers. And we're currently in the midst of an exciting Attic Roadshow donor drive. And so I encourage you to consider a trip into your attics and see what hidden riches are there and perhaps even think about donating. And so we have a flyer that talks about this drive out on the table. Our lead archivist, Vince Lee, will be there, and we have some really exciting highlights from our archives that address the issues we'll be talking about this evening. And particularly what I find to be super fun is that we have oral history listening stations, where you can listen to Muslim women in our community who contributed to a really exciting oral history project documenting voices breaking boundaries, artists in our community. I'd also like to bring your attention to the next Women's Studies Living Archive, which will be focused on ending sexual assault. How do we get there? And so this live oral interview with advocates will take place on February 23rd, next week, at 11:30 in the Rockwell Pavilion in Anderson Library. Tonight's talk is also a collaboration with the Center for Public History, which is a long-standing program at the University of Houston, 30 years old, and really prepares historians in careers for museum work and libraries and policy and consulting and education and more, and I think this evening reflects the broadness of the Center for Public History. We're celebrating Women's History Month next month, with a panel discussion and special screening of Wednesdays in Mississippi, which profiles women that were engaged in the Freedom Summer of 1964. And that event will take place in the Honors College Commons of Anderson Library on March 7th from 4 to 6 p.m. So I highly suggest you come for that. So thank you for this evening. Thank you to Elizabeth Gregory, Dr. Elizabeth Gregory, Dr. Adina Also-Wael, and to Ayanna McLeod of the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. Thanks also to Dr. Abed Takridi of the History Department, as well as Dr. Marty Melosi and Dr. Wes Jackson of the Center for Public History. Certainly without Dr. Jackson's heavy lifting, this event would not have happened tonight. And so now I turn to introduce our wonderful speaker. Samina Ali is an acclaimed writer. Her riveting debut novel, Madras on Rainy Days, was published in 2004. It won a Best First Novel prize in France and was a finalist for the PEN Hemingway Award in Fiction. And she also blogs for the Huffington Post and the Daily Beast, is very much sought after thinker and speaker on Muslim women's issues. She has a wonderful website, groundbreakhers.com. And she's also a digital activist. And in 2013, Ali curated a rich online exhibit, Muslima, Muslim Women's Art and Voices. This received international interest and really was a global project. Presented in conjunction with the International Museum of Women, now part of the Global Fund for Women. And we're going to see highlights of this wonderful exhibit. It's visually stunning, it's profoundly moving, and really featured a whole range of artists and writers and political activists from around the globe. It also had a 9-month consciousness-raising experiment that I think, for some of the historians in the audience, will draw our attention in the future, as this digital archive continues to resonate in our own time. Muslima reflects Ali's prior decades of activism. In 2004, she co-founded Daughters of Hajar, a group that advocates Muslim women's rights, and helped lead a challenge to gender segregation in a mosque in Morgantown, West Virginia. She's also very passionate about women's health, and currently is writing about her near-death experience in childbirth, and bravely speaks about what she went through to encourage greater open discussion about childbearing and motherhood. And so we're hoping that she'll talk a little bit about that work in progress as well. She received an MA from University of Oregon, and we're really thrilled to have her. And we're equally fortunate to have Eesha Pandit as this evening's moderator. And we're hoping they'll have a wonderful dialogue that demonstrates also Pandit's work as a Houston-based freelance journalist who has her work appear in The Nation, in the Texas Observer, and Feminism, and Bitch Magazine. She writes a frequent, I believe weekly, column in Salon that covers issues of race and gender and immigration. She's also a digital activist. She was a founding member of the Crunk Feminist Collective that has a wonderful blog. And she's in the process of working on, I believe, launching a political consulting firm as well. So she's a jack of all trades. And also leads the board of directors for the National Network of Abortion Funds. She has a BA from Mount Holyoke College and an MA from the University of Chicago. So we're going to have a great evening ahead of us. And without further ado, Samina Ali. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out this evening. Let me get on the other side of this cord. Okay. Thank you, Leandra, for the introduction and also for introducing my work to your classes and to all of you here this evening. I want to begin my talk by asking everyone a question. You don't have to say it out loud. What is the first word that comes to your mind when I say Muslim woman? Be honest. The first word. I want you to hold on to that because I'm going to circle back to it at the end of the talk. As Leandra mentioned, I'm an author and a curator, which basically means that I travel quite a lot and I meet lots of people in various walks of life. Inevitably, one or two people at talks just like this will feel comfortable enough with me to come up to me after the talk and say, you know, you're not what I imagined a Muslim woman would be like. And of course, I have to ask, really? How did you imagine a Muslim woman would be like? How did you imagine I would be like? Unfortunately, for me, the answers I get aren't very interesting. They're pretty predictable. The words that pop into many people's minds when they think of a Muslim woman are veiled, submissive, victim, Arab, extremist. So if one of these words popped into your mind, you're not alone. In fact, when I was curating Muslima, we partnered with an organization called Misrepresentation. Misrepresentation is focused on changing how media portrays women. In our joint research, we discovered that 91% of media, that's articles, radio, digital, internet, 91% of media negatively portrays Muslims. The ratio is even higher for Muslim women. Why? Why is it that high? Because salacious stories get a higher number of clicks and tweets and likes. So how do we change that? How do we effectively change stereotypes? And I don't just mean stereotypes about Muslim women. I mean any stereotypes we may have about any group of people. How do we get beyond that mold and begin a new conversation based in reality? Over a decade ago, I decided to do this in two ways. First, I decided that the best way to change the media-driven stereotypes of Muslim women was to understand and use the media to help me get my message out. And second, I decided to be honest about what may be happening in my faith community that was driving those stereotypes. After all, stereotypes do have some semblance in reality. Some Muslim women are oppressed in some parts of the world. In Saudi Arabia, Muslim women are not allowed to drive a car, and they are forced to wear a full face veil. In Afghanistan, the Nobel Peace Prize winner Malala Yousafzai was shot in the head by a Taliban soldier for insisting on attending school when education was forbidden to girls. And in Pakistan, as this year's Oscar-nominated film, A Girl in the River shows, up to 4,000 girls and women are victims of honor killings. Honor killings basically mean that male relatives have the right to kill women and girls who dishonor or bring shame to the family through behavior like dating. And in our own country, a demeaning custom took root a few years ago, preventing Muslim women from entering a mosque from the front doors as men do. Similar to what we saw during America's racial segregation era, Muslim women were being treated like second-class citizens and were being forced to use separate back entrances just to go into a mosque to pray. As you can see, like all women, Muslim women around the world are enduring various types of humiliating and demeaning restrictions. And yet, as surprising as this may seem for all of you, not one of those restrictions has a legitimate basis in Islam. Now, I know how difficult it is to believe, especially for those of you who are only familiar with Islam based on what you see in media. After all, isn't it Sharia law that legitimizes something as barbaric as an honor killing? Well, we've all been brainwashed to believe that, yes, in fact, Islam is responsible for that. So I'm going to say it again. There is no basis in Islamic teachings for denying women their equal rights, their humanity. There is no basis for these uncivilized customs, the injustices that you're witnessing. The savage practices that some brainwash you into believing are rooted in Islam are in fact rooted in what I call the 3 Ps: power, politics, patriarchy. Those 3 pillars are used by men both in some Muslim majority countries like Saudi Arabia and certainly by all Muslim extremist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, whatever it is, to legitimize laws stripping women of their rights. Some years back, I wrote a novel called Madras on Rainy Days. And in that novel, I addressed this issue head on. That novel speaks to the various ways Islam is manipulated to justify the mistreatment of women and girls. The story centers around a young woman named Layla, who is 19 years old, about the age many of you are here today. She's grown up in the US, but her parents want her to return to India to get into an arranged marriage. Now, Layla hates the idea of returning to India to marry a man she doesn't know. So she does what most 19-year-olds would do. she rebels. She rashly gets into a relationship with a man at her school, and then she accidentally gets pregnant. The novel opens 4 days before her wedding, when she's pregnant and she has no one to confide in. Now, I've already told you about honor killings and what may potentially happen to a girl in her situation. So why in the world would Layla find herself in this predicament? The answer is she doesn't know she has the right to choose what happens to her. She doesn't know that according to her faith, she can choose the man she wants to marry. And later on, when her arranged marriage doesn't work out, she can even exercise her Islamic right to divorce him. In fact, Layla doesn't know that at 19, she doesn't even have to get married. She can tell her parents she just wants to finish her education. The reason Layla doesn't know any of this is because she has never been told. Why not? Because it's much easier to control women when they don't know their rights. Luckily for Layla, I guide her through this story. And my hope is to show through her how important it is for young women, no matter their faith or their background, to take control of their lives and chart their own destinies. To not let spoken and unspoken messages dictate what they do. So it saddens me to say that I have, in my various travels, met and continue to meet quite a lot of Laylas. In fact, about a year after I was traveling with my book, I had met so many Laylas that I decided to take the message of the book to the streets. I founded an American Muslim feminist organization. That issue of women being forced to use the back entrance, that was still weighing on me. So I finally decided something had to be done about it. My feminist organization was small. There were only 5 of us, hand-chosen women, but we weren't hindered by our small size. We chose a mosque on the East Coast that prevented women from entering through the front doors. And we 5 women gathered at the front doors of that mosque, and we entered through the front doors. And if that wasn't enough, we raised it a notch. We 5 women prayed in the main sanctuary, standing beside men rather than behind men, as was expected of us. That happened in 2005, long before YouTube and videos going viral. And yet, our protest went viral. Media around the world talked about our protest. People everywhere saw our photos in the internet. And there were women in all parts of the world who were inspired to actively pursue gender equality in their own mosques. Change, positive change was happening. And this time it was because I learned to use media to help spread my message. In fact, that extensive media coverage forced leading American Muslim organizations to rewrite their bylaws. They now assert that any woman can enter any mosque in America through the front doors if she so chooses. And that is the phrasing that I love. If she so chooses. Because choice is the key word. Choice is the crux of my own message. Women must be able to exercise their basic human right to choose how they want to live their lives. How much education do I want? What career path suits me best? How do I want to dress? Who do I want to spend my life with? The only right answer is the answer a woman chooses for herself. I'm grateful to say that I am not the only one pushing back against both the media-driven stereotypes of Muslim women and the ways in which Islam is used by too many to dehumanize women. Countless others are engaged in this struggle. Courageous women you probably haven't heard of because media doesn't offer cover them. Or quite frankly, media outrightly disregards them because they don't fit the stereotype. And because of that, they won't get clicks and tweets. So when I was asked to curate the virtual exhibition Muslima, I knew it was my opportunity to use what I had learned about media to give a voice and a platform to those brave but often overlooked Muslim women around the world. Now, if you're not familiar with Muslima, I have it pulled up. This is an exhibition that was sponsored, that was put on by the International Museum of Women, which is now part of Global Fund for Women. It is a revolutionary exhibition. It's the first of its kind global exhibition showing Muslim women from around the world. You will meet artists, thought leaders, CEOs of companies, poets, writers, photographers, filmmakers. Basically anything you can do is on here. And you'll see that every time I press the home page, different parts of Muslima come up. You have a very slow internet connection here. And the reason different, here you go. In this exhibition, what I do is I introduce you to the first Muslim woman who received the Nobel Peace Prize, Dr. Shireen Ebadi, who is from Iran, who I've interviewed in here. You will also meet the first American Muslim to translate the Quran into English, Dr. Leila Pakdir, who I won't show you this picture, but one of the things that I was struck with Leila was that while she did the translation of the Quran, called the Sublime Quran, into English, she returned the feminine into the text, which the majority of male translators through history, had taken out. You're going to meet graffiti artists who were involved in the Arab Springs. And then you'll meet even people like Helen Zubayg, who's not Muslim at all, but who happens to live in the Middle East. And she deals with issues which we commonly refer to as Muslim issues. But she's Christian. It's a woman driving a car with her abaya. A Muslim woman superhero. I think that's self-explanatory. I'm going to go through and show you a few. If you missed it, there's the American flag. Yes, you can be American and Muslim. I'm going to go through and show you a few of my favorites. This is Bushra Al-Mutawakkil, who is from Yemen. She is a world-renowned photographer. This is actually her. She is with her daughter, and this is her daughter's doll. This is her Veil series. And what Bushra, the photographer, does is she talks about, through her Veil series, the effects of, I guess, a very harsh interpretation of Islam that is coming into Yemen. So the first photograph here shows Yemeni culture as it used to be. So you have Bushra in her very colorful scarf. Her daughter is not covered. Her doll, of course, is not covered. But as you can see, Bushra is remarking on the spreading of more conservative values. And now the doll is covered. The daughter is covered. Bushra's own veil goes from being colorful to black. And she becomes more and more covered until the very end, when she disappears. I'm going to show this series because my daughter's in the audience. I thought she would enjoy the Barbie series, which is a more humorous look at what's happening. She talks about the interplay. As many stereotypes as we might have of Muslim women, there is also a stereotype of Americans. There's Barbie and Ken, Muslim version. I want to show you a more lighter side. This was one of the things, this was a series that was very popular in Muslima by Homa Arkhani, who's an Iranian artist. There was so many artists coming out of Iran who are doing incredible things. This is, of course, the iconic Marilyn Monroe pose. In an ice cream cone. Again, Barbie, as you can see, Barbie has come to represent American women just as much as the veil to a lot of Americans has come to represent Muslims. Here she is on a stripper pole with her vacuum and the veil. And this is supposed to be a billboard of everyone getting ready. She's not spinning a record. One of the things that is often overlooked is the spiritual aspects of Islam, the Sufi sect of Islam. This is an artist named Maimuna. This is Maimuna right here. She's a photographer, again, world-renowned photographer. This is one of her daughters. Maimuna was born in Italy, and she was Christian. Through her travels as a photographer, she ended up in Africa, fell in love with an African man and married him, converted to Islam, and this is her other daughter with him. Maimuna really truly represents the inclusive nature of Islam. On the one hand, she's raising a daughter from her first marriage as Christian, and on the other hand, she's raising a Muslim daughter. I wanted to show you, let me see if I can pull up her spiritual Sufi. There she is, that's Maimuna right there. These are actually sculptures that Maimuna creates with her hands, and they're about 10 feet tall. And women have to enter them by standing on a stool that you can't see. But again, these are her daughters. And what I love about her photography is it truly does represent the inclusive, the very spiritual aspects. You can see the women. The last thing I'm going to show you, I'll just let the video run. This is a video that was made by a documentary filmmaker named Alka Sadat in Afghanistan. And she made this video when Afghanistan was still being governed by Taliban. And it was life-threatening for her to have a camera, especially a video camera, doing any sorts of images. So this video is really interesting because you see her life and how constrained it is, because the shots are done from behind windows or behind shutters, behind doors, because if she's caught with the camera, she could be executed. The irony is that she is, in this film, making a documentary. The film is called Half Value Life, because that's what she feels like women are treated as in Afghanistan, that their life is of half value. And she talks in this, she is filming another woman, a leading attorney in Herat, Afghanistan, named Maria Bashir. And Maria Bashir was placed in Herat. She chose to work in Herat in order to reverse. Herat was known as having the highest number of domestic violence cases. And she went in there and she decided that she would help women by educating them about their rights. As she did that, she herself became a target. And so while you're watching this video, and while Alka Sadat is interviewing Maria Bashir in her own home, you actually suddenly see Maria Bashir's home bombed, and the whole house is shaking, and there's just a lot of chaos, and people are trying to leave. And after that, Maria Bashir sends her children out of Afghanistan to safer parts of the world. And again, she's doing a lot of this taping from under her veil. The idea of risking one's life to catapult change is extreme to many of us in this room. And when I go around and speak about the exhibition, many people ask me what the common thread is. And this is truly the common thread that I found. That no matter what country they're living in, Muslim women are in fact risking their lives. Many of them have been imprisoned or are risking imprisonment. Many have sent their children abroad to keep them safe, like Maria Bashir. And then they themselves stay behind to battle intolerant laws and traditions holding women back. The tools that these women are using are not guns or bombs. They're using street art, writing, film, photographs. Some, like Maria Bashir, who is right there. I also interview her in the exhibition. They're becoming attorneys and trying to change the laws from within the system. Others are becoming involved in government so that they can change things from the top down. But together, all of these women are promoting peace, tolerance, justice, and equality. So I want to end, and before I begin my discussion, my conversation with Eesha, by asking you again the same question I began with. What is the first word that you think of when you think of a Muslim woman? I hope that I've inspired even one of you tonight to see that there's no one answer to that question. And I hope that I have begun to change that conversation for you. So thank you.
Okay, we'll do it with that. Okay, all right, thank you so much for that. That was really great. So I have a few questions for Samina, and then we will open it up for you all to ask your questions to her as well. So thank you for being here with us in Houston, and for your great work. I'll start where you just ended. I remember very clearly I was graduating college the year that the War on Terror began in 2003. And I remember the images of Muslim women that were used to, in part, justify the war. And I remember thinking, God, that's an impossible position to be in, to say, don't fight a war on our behalf, and also things are bad. So I'm curious a little bit about you've talked about how you counter the idea that there's one narrative and one experience of being a Muslim woman, but I'm curious about how you balance the outrage and the drawing attention to the suffering of Muslim women with the showcasing the resistance. How does that work for you? How do you navigate that?
Well, it's not easy, because when you talk about the ways in which Islam is used to justify, I should say misused to justify the treatment of women, then you get a lot of Muslims who say, oh, you're out there, you're feeding the media stereotypes of what's happening, and then suddenly you're treated as an outsider. And I think the issue, though, is that we have to start addressing these issues. I'm not just airing dirty laundry. Mm-hmm. I think that there are activists out there who are saying, hey, listen, if we want to change how others view us, then you've got to start by changing yourself. I mean, that's just a basic fact. You have to start by changing yourself. And that's what I'm hoping to do. And that's what I'm hoping that something like the Muslima exhibition does. That's what I'm hoping that my activism does. That it's always a two-pronged thing. Yes, we are on the one hand dealing with media stereotypes, but on the other hand, we do have work to do as Muslim communities, mm-hmm. and we can't just put it under the rug.
So you write fiction, you write some nonfiction in terms of your interviewing, and also you curate images. So I'm curious how you think about each of these avenues that you've chosen, why you've chosen them, and what you think they offer to this project that you've undertaken.
Well, I think it's, no matter what project I'm doing, it's the same message. So when I wrote the novel, it began with that message of, okay, well, let's start separating what's Islam from how it's practiced through culture and through tradition. Mm-hmm. And then I took that message when we led the march on the mosque. That was one of the ways that activism was really part of that message. Mm-hmm. And now with Muslima, it's the same message over and over again. So I think it's just the same message. I remember when I was in grad school, I went to grad school to learn, basically I got my Master of Fine Arts in fiction writing. And we had a visiting writer come in, and he said, it doesn't matter if a writer writes 10 books or 20 books or just one book. Even the writer who writes 20 books is basically dealing over and over and over again with the same core message. He's just writing it from 20 different angles. And I think that's basically what I've been doing, mm-hmm. whether it's through an exhibition or through my activism or through just writing or doing blogs for Huffington Post and Daily Beast. Mm-hmm. It's all about the one message.
So I'm going to stay on this topic of writing for a minute, because I'm sure there are some students and others in the room who are aspiring writers or writers themselves, and it's certainly a question I've wrestled with. It took me about 10 years of writing to be able to say that I was a writer when someone asked, what do you do? And so I'm curious about that, because particularly when your topic is personal and feels connected to your own story, how you have, in your own career, navigated the courage and confidence it takes to say, I'm writing this down, I want other people to read it, and it's a story worth worth writing? Yeah. I know.
I think writing is such a different, when you go, my husband is an attorney, and I'm sure that when he graduated from law school, he was able to say when he passed the bar, I'm an attorney. And my younger brother is a doctor, and I'm sure when he did all his residencies and all of that, he was able to say, I'm a doctor. But you don't really get that kind of rite of passage as a writer. And I think it took years. It really took years. Just your degree as a writer doesn't give you the stamp of approval. I mean, I can sit on the airplane and the guy next to me will say, well, I'm a writer too. Everybody's a writer nowadays. It's not anyone can be a writer. So I think it took me years and years and years, and the publication of my book, and then, many more publications to say, yeah, I am comfortable with saying I'm a writer.
So what advice would you give students or other writers in the audience who are struggling with claiming that? I'm asking for myself.
Writing comes from within you. I mean, it is such a difficult path. I think the writing industry has completely changed since the internet, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to curate an exhibition, because so many people have moved away from reading, and they've gone to more visuals. But I say that even as I'm writing my next book. So, a lot of what I'm speaking about is my own sort of love-hate relationship with writing. It kind of pulls me away, and then I come back, and I go back and forth with it.
Do you want to talk a little bit about your next project? I'll circle back to a few more questions, but since you made a segue.
Well, after Muslima, I decided when my son is here in the audience, he's 16 years old now, but when I was pregnant with my son, and I want to say that, I want to make it a point so that everyone knows that I was, at UCSF, which is the University of California, San Francisco, one of the leading hospitals in the nation. We had, his father was working at Stanford at the time, so we had the best health insurance in the nation at number 5. And while I was pregnant, I was feeling lots of strange symptoms. And I was in my 20s, and the doctors kept dismissing me, and they kept saying, no, everything's fine. And it turned out that things weren't fine at all. And when I went in to deliver, during my delivery itself, I started to have a lot of head pain and a lot of chest pain. And I started to have double vision and triple and quadruple, and there were a lot of things that were going wrong. And I continued to say, hey, things are not, I'm having a lot of pain. I should be having pain down here, but I'm having a lot of pain up here. And the doctors kept ignoring me. And it turned out that 20 minutes after I delivered him, I had a grand mal seizure, which on the scale of seizures is the worst you can have. And for my chest pain, the doctor gave me Alka-Seltzer. And after my seizure, the doctor said, oh, oops. She'd been complaining of a lot of things. We should wheel her in to get her an MRI of her brain. And it turned out I had multiple brain hemorrhages. And the chest pain they'd given me Alka-Seltzer for was a heart attack. And then I landed in a coma, and I had multiple organ failure, liver failure, kidney failure. I mean, my blood stopped clotting, my blood platelets went into the single digits. It was basically to the point where the doctors told my family, if you're lucky, she'll just die. Because if you're not lucky, then one of you has to decide who's going to be her ward. And miraculously, I came back. And even after I came back, I had such severe brain damage that the doctors predicted that I wouldn't be ever able to write or speak. I was blind in one eye. And so they didn't think that I was going to get to be normal again. And when I left the hospital, I remember the doctor said, oh, you had this thing called eclampsia, which because it was undiagnosed, well, I wonder why it was underdiagnosed, led to it becoming in its severest form called HELP syndrome. And for 15 years, literally 15 years, I carried around with me this strange, almost a humiliating feeling that, oh my God, I can't even give birth correctly. You know, like, why did this happen to me? This strange disease that no one knows the cause of it, no one knows how to treat it. And I'm going to a leading hospital in the nation. And then what happened a year ago is that I found that all of the newspapers were suddenly talking about how America is the only developed nation in the world that has a rising maternal mortality rate. Rising maternal mortality rate. And guess what? Eclampsia, what I was afflicted with, this strange disease that I thought no one had, number 2 killer of women in America. And it affects and they say, in my research I found that they say, oh, you know, women of color, they're more affected by eclampsia than white women. And in my research I found that it's actually not true. All women of all backgrounds get it. It's just that when a woman of color like me goes in and says, hey, you know, I'm feeling these strange symptoms, we're just dismissed more. So when I saw that it was a number 2 killer and not in fact a strange disease that I was inflicted with, I decided that it was enough. It's very much in line with my message of education. Women need to be educated. And so I decided that it was time to write the next book, which my neurologist had been encouraging me to write for 15 years, and I finally decided to write it so that I can start educating women and showing them how to take better control of their lives.
Mm-hmm. I've had 2 friends who've had it, and both of them were told that it's something they've never seen before.
Oh.
You know, it's just like, as though it's not happening all the time. So that's fascinating. And, you know, one of the things that I think is particularly interesting about it is I work on reproductive health care and reproductive health issues, and I've learned that women of color are given less pain medication in labor, are not believed as much when they're saying that they're having complications. So I'm curious about what you're finding around disparities in health treatment for particularly pregnant women of color in this scenario.
The research that I've done so far shows that African American women and Latino women are more likely to die of of complications with either pregnancy or delivery than white women, because we're not taken seriously.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm look forward to reading it and sharing it with many of my friends who have felt alone and isolated in this experience themselves. Let's shift for a second back to Muslima, and I'm curious about how. So you've got a digital archive, and you're taking, you know, this digital space. So it's not a museum exhibit in the way that museum exhibits, we know of them. They come for a few months, they're curated, people walk through and experience them. Instead, it's online. It happened a few years ago. It's still available. And also you mentioned the consciousness raising portion of this. So I'm curious about how you think, 2 questions. One, what you're hoping when people look back at this 5-10 years from now, what they will see about this particular moment and this exhibit. And then also how you think the digital spaces create new opportunities for doing social justice work.
You know, I've been on the front lines of this conversation since soon after 9/11. And I can tell you that when Muslima was launched, I think in like 2013 or 2014, it was actually a pretty good time to launch the exhibition, because enough years had gone by since 9/11 where people were open and they wanted to hear the other side. Media wanted to know, okay, how did we get this story wrong? How is this narrative wrong? Which is why I think that Muslima, it received so much press from The Economist, London Guardian, O Magazine. I mean, it was pretty much everywhere. It was truly a revolutionary exhibition. I think things have changed since San Bernardino and the Paris bombings recently. I think that there's a spike in the Islamophobic feelings that we have in the nation. But I think that one of the great things about it being online and being a virtual exhibition is that I think that this is just, I know for us it's like 10 years, 20 years maybe of an extremely intolerant time. But I think that if you look at American history, if you look back on it, you have the Japanese internment camps, you have the MacArthur era, you have civil rights movement. There was, we had racial segregation in this country not that long ago. And we have the women's movement. It wasn't that long ago when women weren't allowed to vote in this country. So a lot of the rights that women in this country now take for granted, they weren't given to women that long ago in the historical aspect. So I think that it's a wonderful archive. I think when people look back on it, I'm hoping when my daughter looks back on it years from now, or when future generations look back on it, it's going to be yet another blip in American history. Oh yeah, I remember that time when we had such high Islamophobia, but I am confident that we're going to move past this.
Has it sparked either online or offline community dialogues? I'm particularly personally very interested in how what we do on the internet translates to the kind of activism that we need in order to make change, for lack of a better word, in the streets. So I'm curious if that kind of engagement with Muslima has happened.
Oh, absolutely. So for any exhibition that we do at the International Museum of Women, you partner with museums around the world. And for Muslima, we partnered with 3 other museums. The Ayala Museum in the Philippines, the Women's Museum in Denmark, and the Islamic Civilization Museum in United Arab Emirates. And the reason we partner with brick and mortar museums is so we can, around the globe, is so that we can actually ask these museums for not only to be our partners in terms of PR that comes after an exhibition launches, but also in terms of asking them what the issues are in their local communities. So the Muslims who are in the Philippines have very different issues than the Muslims who live in the United Arab Emirates, who have very different issues than the Muslims in Europe. And so it was truly a collaborative effort where we had to get on the ground. And in places like Denmark, where there were, and I think at the time there was a lot of fear in Europe of homegrown terrorists. And so that museum was able to do pop-up art from the exhibition and help their citizens to engage with the museum in a way that just something like a virtual museum couldn't. Now I want to also say that a lot of people think, oh, it's a virtual museum and a brick and mortar museum would be so much better. But think about where a virtual museum can go to and where it does reach. We had outreach for something called this Muslima Stories, where we asked everyone, because I interviewed a lot of very prominent photographers and activists for the exhibition, but what if just somebody off the streets wanted to be part of the exhibition? So we had something called Muslima Stories, where we asked women to submit a selfie with 6 words that basically shared what it means to them to be a Muslim woman. And that was a very popular aspect of the Muslima exhibition. And you know, when you think about it, there are villages in India where women are writing from, or there's places in Africa where people are writing from. People were writing in literally from around the world, and that isn't something that a brick and mortar museum can do.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. I have several more questions, but I want to take some time to open it up for the audience's questions, and I know we have some students here who have some questions for you, so why don't I do that now? So thank you. Yeah.
My name is, can you hear me? Oh, okay. My name is Shifa, and one of my questions is, in your opinion, what effect have the Western feminist movements here in the States and in our generation had on the feminist movements around the globe, particularly in the Middle Eastern countries and Arab countries, or the Islamic societies around the globe?
Did everyone hear that? She wants to know, well, how the American feminist movement has affected feminist movements around the globe from my experience. I interviewed a woman named Zaina Anwar, who is in the exhibition. She's in Malaysia. She started a global organization called Muslim Sisterhood, but of course the name escapes me right now. And she is now doing an organization called Musawa. And what Zaina Anwar talks about is that she would like to distance herself, and I think that this is one of the threads that also went through the exhibition with a lot of Muslim women, that they don't want to associate with American feminist movement because they don't identify with it. The American feminist movement is very much centered in, Christianity. It's a white middle class movement. So many women feel like, wait, we need to be able to have our own movement. We need to define our own feminist movement, and it needs to be based within Islam itself. And we don't even want Western influences of any sort because they feel that it might even discredit them and what they're trying to do in their own nations. And so they really distance themselves from America and any sort of Western thoughts and ideals. Years and years and years ago, there was an American feminist, and she ran through the streets of Tehran naked, Kitty Millett. And her point in running through the streets of Tehran naked was to liberate the Muslim woman. And she simply became a spectacle because you don't need to go in, and I think that's the point of many Muslim women. We don't need to be liberated. We don't need what Bush said. We don't need you to come in and fight our wars. We're doing it. If we want to do it, we'll do it ourselves.
Hi, my name is Sara. Thank you for coming today. My question is, as a person, Muslim or not, male or female, if I come across someone who claims Islam to be anti-feminist, how can I combat that negative stereotype? What can I say?
If they claim what?
If they claim Islam to be anti-feminist.
If they claim to be anti-feminist?
If they claim Islam.
Islam. They
Oh,
claim
Islam to be anti-feminist. I think that that's a common, that's a lot of people say you can't be a feminist and you can't be Muslim and feminist together. It's something that just doesn't happen. I was in Professor Leandra's class earlier today, and I was showing a 6-word memoir from a woman who is fully covered, and she says, I'm a Salafi feminist. And so for me, a feminist, truly, if you get rid of Feminism 101, if you get rid of all the rhetoric, if you get rid of all of that, all the dialogue around it, it's about choice. Does a woman have a choice? So if in certain European countries a woman is being told, no, she cannot veil, it disempowers a woman. If in certain Muslim majority countries she's being told you have to veil, it disempowers a woman. I think that the only way a woman is empowered and making a feminist choice is if she herself chooses for herself what she wants to do. And I choose veiling because it's just a simple example. You know, it's the most iconic, and the veil has become this iconic image of a Muslim woman. So that is, you know, a good example of it. But I think there's many Muslim women who choose or not.
I wanted to know, I attended a talk previously, and there was a gentleman who shared his story about when he asked his mom why she wore the hijab. And she explained to him that it was in order to prevent men from being sexually provoked. And as I sat there with that response, I was wondering maybe there's something beyond that and beyond that gentleman's experience, maybe, and the response of the mother to her son. And I'm sure that it's different with respect to context, historical, political, geographic location. And what I want to know is, what is the reason behind women wearing hijab? And I know that, as you said, what I took note in your presentation was you separating Islam from the three P's: politics, patriarchy, and power. One of the most important ones. So I just want to know, how can we go beyond that, you know, gentleman's experience and that mother's response, and really understand the complexity behind the truth?
So her question for anyone who can't hear is, how do you go beyond the simple answer to why a woman veils to more complex answers? Well, the history of veiling, I mean, it's a complex history. If you look historically at veiling, it came to the Middle East actually from Christian women who were traveling through, and Muslim women at the time took on veiling, and it was an economic, social way of expressing themselves. A veil was like carrying a Prada purse. It was like wearing Gucci or Chanel. It was for women who wanted to show that they were in the upper classes. They weren't out working in the fields. They didn't have to work. And slowly it became more assimilated. Now, Islamically, there's obviously two different opposing schools of thought. There are people who say, yes, it is within the Islamic context that a woman needs to veil, and then there are other scholars who say, no, absolutely not. So I think what it comes down to is what I was saying earlier to Sarah, that you need, if a woman chooses to do it, I think women choose to do it on a variety of different reasons. I mean, women choose to veil in order to express themselves. Lots of different women chose to veil after 9/11 because they wanted to oppose American politics and to express and say, yeah, I am Muslim and I am American. I don't think there is an easy answer. I think what I've been saying all along is that it's an individual answer.
Is this on? I just wanted to add one thing to that. As someone who's not a Muslim feminist, but I do think it's really telling that the veil is the central point of contention. It really matters that that's what we become fascinated with, and I think just not to offer an answer to the question, but to offer a question to the question, which is why is the focal point of Muslim women's identity about the veil? And I think if we reflect back on the places from which the question comes, it has to do with an obsession with women's representation, with women's bodies. It comes from that place, and I think that is in some ways a more interesting question to reflect on, at least for me anyway. You know, I think it's curious. I think the point of choice is important, but for those of us that aren't Muslim feminists, I imagine Muslim feminists get asked that question a lot, and I think it's important to note and think, thoughtfully about where it comes from. So.
If I may elaborate on her thought, I'm so glad you said that, because I think that when the veil or hijab becomes a symbol of oppression, that it really inhibits our understanding of what oppression even means or what it entails.
When I was interviewing, like I said, I met hundreds of women from around the world when I was doing the exhibition, and the hijab, it's never an issue. Women are like, can we just talk about the veil issues, please? Can we just get rid of the veil issue? This is really an issue that's been imposed on Muslim women from the West, I think, and Western media. It's not an internal issue.
I'm going to take your question and then Dina.
Okay. So in order to spread your message of equity, you mentioned using different angles to do that. So just to include fiction writing, non-fiction writing, the Sigma project. And so in order to take all those different angles, you've had to take on different roles: project manager, researcher, creative writer. As someone who's interested in fiction and creative writing, does stepping into the role of being a creative writer give you abilities or powers to spread your message better or differently than the others?
He's asking in my various hats, the hats I've put on: curator, fiction writer, blogger, which is the most effective in changing.
Well, what particular things about fiction make it more or less powerful in doing that?
What about fiction makes it more or less powerful? I've been writing since I was a child. I was writing, my parents emigrated from India, and writing was never something that was valued in the home. It was, we were all encouraged to go on and be doctors and lawyers and, do something that was practical. And I remember writing constantly and then hiding my writing so that my parents wouldn't find it. So writing is something I do quite naturally. It's something that I do even when I'm asked not to do. I think the thing with writing is it's a story, and what moves people is stories. And so no matter what I'm doing, whether it's Muslima, the reason Muslima can be potentially as powerful as it is, and I have to say that it's become an exhibition where I still continue to get emails from different organizations, whether it's the Children's Museum of Manhattan, that wants me to come in and help them to do an exhibition, or an environmental group that wants to do an exhibition, or groups in Australia. I mean, this is truly an exhibition that people benchmark as something that's been successful. What makes it successful is the story. That's it. So it truly, it's not like I'm leaving, it's not a true departure for me. It's still encapsulating, it's still capturing, it's still bringing together stories. It's a chorus of stories, whereas the novel was a singular story.
So we have a question from Dina, and then we'll come to your question back.
Thank you, Samina, and thank you for being here. I had a question that really, it comes from the veil discussion, but also so much more from what you've been saying. And you began by saying, how do we change stereotypes? And you've offered us a wonderful way to start looking at that. The stereotypes, though, and this is my question, are they really a function of ingrained, vested political interests? So this supports a political program. And if that's the case, then what do we do?
Did everyone get a question? Well, we can either all kill ourselves, vote, I think, in the next presidential election. And I think the only thing as an activist that I can say is you just keep working. You have to keep working, and I promise you I've been doing this since 9/11, and It is not easy. I always think, okay, we've made it. We are now at a place where we can have a conversation. It's not just me shouting at people and saying, listen, this isn't rooted in Islam. And I feel like I'm having a conversation, and then something happens. The Paris bombings happen. Or Donald Trump is speaking. Or, it's something, San Bernardino happens. Something will always happen, and then I am back at square one. Or I'm worse. I'm in negatives again. And then I have to start it all over again. But, perspective. As I said, the common theme among all of the women that I had with Muslima, whether it's Sima Samar, who stepped down as Vice President of Afghanistan because of death threats, Maria Bashir, Shireen Ebadi, who won the first Nobel Peace Prize, Iran confiscated the medal. She has since moved out of Iran. Bushra, whose photographs I showed you earlier of the mother, the daughter, and the doll, she has since left Yemen. Why? Because these women are facing death threats, because they're being imprisoned. So when I look at what I'm doing, it's nothing compared to that.
You said that even women don't know about the rights or the rights to choose. Do you educate men that women have the right to choose, and how much harder is it to educate
Do I educate men?
women have the right to choose?
That women have the right to choose. When we started the feminist organization and we marched on the mosque, it led a year later to Amina Wadud being the first Muslim woman to lead a prayer in New York. And I'm sure many of you have heard about that. That came out of our walk. That was our organization that did that. And we needed the men. We needed their support. So yes, absolutely, men need to be in this fight with us. And what I found when I was doing the exhibition, when I was talking to Shireen Ebadi, the Nobel Peace Prize winner from Iran, she told me that in Iran, more men support women than in any other part of the Middle East. And she was talking about just how much support women in Iran get in order to help bring about change. And I think absolutely it's necessary. And I went to Leandra's class this afternoon and there was one man in the whole classroom. And so yeah, we need him.
And we'll take this one and then Kristen.
So yeah, just as an extension of that question, you had before said that this was kind of Muslim women had to be fighting the fight. It had to be their fight. Someone as outsiders, we couldn't be fighting that fight for you. So I'm wondering, what is the role of men in that fight? And it's not to be actually fighting the fight.
So that's my son, who nearly killed me. And he's wondering, how do men become part of the fight when I stated earlier that Muslim women need to do the fight themselves. And I think what I was saying, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because as a clarification point, what I was saying is that Muslim women from different parts of the world, like Malaysia, Zaina Anwar's organization is called Sisters in Islam, and what they're saying is that they don't want Western influences. They don't want to import American or European ideas. But I do think that they would very much welcome internal, within their own communities, support from both men and women.
Sure. You had a question? And then we'll go to Kristen.
I really appreciate you coming here today and talking with us. I learned a lot from you. And I apologize if you've already addressed this, but you mentioned earlier about perhaps separating Islam from the cultures and the traditions in order to change women representation and it is possible, and to what extent?
How do you separate culture from Islam, from faith, basically? I think that it's a very difficult road, especially when many people are told, this cultural practice is like honor killings. This is rooted in Islam. And it's not. There are so many things that happen in the name of Islam that are simply not part of the religion. Education. I mean, it's simple as that. That's what Musawa does, Sisters in Islam does. That's what Maria Bashir in Afghanistan does. That's what Shirini Badi does. That's what every single woman around, that I've met around the globe is doing. It's education. They're going into the community and they're educating. Musawa specifically is set up. You can get it online. They are specifically set up to educate young women and girls and what truly are their rights, Islamic, God-given rights, so that they can separate those from customs and traditions that may be taking those rights away. I'm not saying, all traditions are bad. Not all traditions and customs are dehumanizing, but certainly there are some. And honor killings comes to mind. The female circumcision comes to mind. There's one of the things that a friend of mine who also has a feminist organization, a Muslim feminist organization, she went into Egypt and she spoke with different women there and told them, you might think this is part of Islam, but it's not. And she worked with male, priests, Muslim alims and Muslim imams, and had them help spread that message. And there was a female doctor who was doing the female circumcision. And the doctor said, oh my God, after she learned that it wasn't part of Islam, she was like, oh my God, I've been doing this for 35 years. And now I've learned. And so she stopped. And she started helping to spread the message that it's not part of Islam. So I think that that's the unfortunate thing. We internalize and we start to accept so many things because we think that they're faith-based, and they're simply not. And so it is a process of unlearning and then relearning. And it is a long process, but there's no way around it. But damn, isn't it rewarding in the end?
Kristen.
So you've talked about a lot of practices and the line between righteous indignation that should be shared by all and Americans coming in and imposing their own paradigm about what feminism or being a feminist is supposed to look like on other people is sort of not there's not a clear demarcation. So what advice would you give to those of us who are not in the Muslim community but want to be supportive because we obviously can't use the same language that you can use within the community. So how do we support you without imposing our own judgments on what Muslim women should want?
But thank you for asking that question. And it's a wonderful question, and that's, I think, how you begin the dialogue. You have to begin it by going in and you ask, having that sense of open-mindedness and saying, okay, I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm not here to tell you the way to live, what's right, what's wrong. To get rid of that kind of mentality and to go in and say, okay, how do we work together? Because we all want the same thing. Like I was saying earlier, when you talk to Muslim women around the world, they're like, could we just stop talking about the veil? What do they want to talk about? The same thing we want to talk about. They want to talk about education. They want to talk about careers. They want to talk about women's rights. They want to talk about basically the same thing. So I think if we can get past any sort of appearances in terms of the veil or not veil, if we can get past those and have an open conversation, I think that's the best thing. I don't know if you want to add anything as someone who's not a Muslim feminist.
Well, I also think it's some of the questions are sort of coming. I think the previous question about how to counter those messages sort of is in this space. I think part of it is also knowing your own history and your own stuff, you know, being able to say, well, this is a narrative that we talk about Islam, but there are all kinds of egregious acts of sexism committed in the name of Christianity or Hinduism or other religions. And so drawing the parallel between the difference between culture and faith is not just a question for Islam and for Muslim feminists, it's a question for feminists of all faiths. And I think that openness and that understanding then is sort of then we're all on equal footing in how we navigate culture and religion. Are we out of time? Okay. All right. So Leandra's giving me the hook. So I'll just close by thanking you and inviting you all to thank Samina with me. So.